to do a passive scan of organizations and to give an organization an idea of what they look like from the outside in. And there's companies out there that do this kind of thing, like BitSight is one of them. I believe they charge you $20,000 a year for a subscription. Anyone here from BitSight? BitSight customers?
Not close.
I'm sorry?
Not close.
Okay. And what BitSight will do is they'll actually just go out and look for they'll look up your DNS records. I think they're probably doing the same thing we are, which is that we look at the DNS records and we also look up the ASN, so that we get all the IPs associated with your BGP routing. And then we go out to Shodan and we find everything we can find out about what's there. And there's a reason we do that, is that part of the problem is that a lot of companies have these cloud initiatives out there, and I'll just skip right forward to that. And they don't really know where their perimeter is anymore. And I have an example of one company I ran a scan for recently. They have a whole bunch of dev and QA systems publicly available on the internet that they're advertising DNS for. qa.xyzcorp.com. And so they've got a whole production systems out there. And why is this a problem? Well, their DevOps people are deploying these things. They've set them up, and it turns out that some of the things that leak when you do that there's a lot of things that could leak, and a lot of things a hacker would want to latch onto to take a look at. Because if you think about it, DevOps people want to do things simply. They often don't do multi-factor authentication. They often do things like don't necessarily pay attention to making the app hardened and secure before they work on getting it to work with basic functionality first. So a lot of times they'll have to have that kind of thing publicly exposed and publicly find that anyone out there on the internet can find is probably not a good practice. And in the case of this one customer I was speaking with recently, it turns out that they actually leaked their API key for Splunk as part of this. And that's probably something that they don't really want to do. I actually have their API key, and I said, no, here, this is your API key for Splunk, right? Where did you get that? Well, it's on Shodan. You can go out there and find it. Actually, anyone can. So this is a big problem with the expanding cloud environment out there. And let's face it, cloud is new to pretty much everybody, and it's a hard thing to do because now you're trying to secure an environment where you have very little traditional visibility. And so part of what we wanted to do was to give customers an idea of what they look like from the outside in. And to do so, what would the people do? Well, they would do what I just talked about. They would actually focus on stealth, because the great thing about this approach, by hitting the DNS entries and then the ASNs and pulling in information from VirusTotal and Shodan, a few other places out there, we identify soft targets. And one of the other things that we've managed to do also is be able to find subdomains that the company may be doing business with, like business partners, and sometimes that's a way to get in. Target found that out with their HVAC vendor. But there could be other business partners out there that are not as, that you could get into, and you can then use that as a stepping stone to target, get more information about the company, get more servers that are vulnerable, places that you can attack. And the really interesting thing about that is that usually the way we get that is through SSL or IP redirect pivots. And so we'll see, you look for a particular domain and there's an IP redirect that sends you to a completely new domain. And that's probably not a good practice. It's something you want to put a stop to if you can. So why do you care? Why should companies care about this? Well, in addition to the fact this is what an attacker would do first, is that if I were really intent on attacking somebody, I would want to do that sort of thing very surreptitiously. I wouldn't want anyone to have an idea that I was looking at them, so they wouldn't get any warning on any of their security infrastructure. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of companies out there that will look at your perimeter security through like a BitSight. BitSight enables you to get information about the scores of other domains that are out there. And so if you want to be a business partner with a company, they'll, some companies will say, well, let's look at their BitSight score and say, oh, well, their security is not great. Do I want to really get into a relationship in business with this company? The other place where that reason why that's important is, how many people have dealt with cybersecurity insurance? Anyone? Bueller? No. Well, to get cybersecurity insurance, it's like your driving record. What does your insurance company do? They look up your driving record in the DMV, find out what, and the police records, find out if there's anything out there, if you're tickets, what other accidents you might have on your record. Well, if cyber insurance companies can do more or less the same thing. They're going to look up and see how good your security appears from the outside in. And so they're going to go ahead and do this sort of thing. So if you have a poor security score, you're going to have a higher insurance premium. And at the end of the day, this approach, the whole idea behind what we are trying to do inside of Palo Alto, and by the way, this is a completely free service. We don't charge anything for this. We just show up, you tell us you'd like us to perform a scan, we give you the results. And we want to make you a harder target. We want to make it so that you are less attractive to attack than other people that are softer, and hopefully the attackers will go to someplace else. Brief note about ethics. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I don't know how the law works exactly, but I've talked to a few people, and they've said that this approach, is legal. You're not likely to get in trouble for it. But if you're doing it inside your own organization, or if you're doing it on a consulting basis, you probably want to obtain permission, because it's a lot easier to defend against that sort of thing if someone makes an accusation. Even though when you're doing this, you're not touching anything that belongs to that company, you're just looking at public records that are available. And as always, use this information for good, and the information you do get back, please treat it as confidential. Even though it's publicly available, if someone gets it from you, that's a problem. And so you want to be very careful about how you protect this stuff. I just delete a lot of it as soon as I'm done with it. And I think gone is a good thing. So what are the things that you should look for? Well, I like to look for some quick wins right off the bat. And there's some less quick wins, and then things that have more effort required. And when I say more effort required, in a lot of cases, it's the security group working with other groups inside an organization to fix some of these problems. So what do some of those look like? Well, the quick wins. One of the things that we find, it just boggles my mind. I don't really understand it, and I've been told there's some good reasons for it, but I haven't gotten anyone to really tell me. One is that there are companies that advertise out in their public DNS records private IP space. I'm not sure what the reason for that is. It doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe someone knows something that I don't, or has some experiences that I haven't had, but I don't understand why you would put a private IP record in your public DNS. And I already touched on this, but boy, dev, QA, and test, dev, QA, and test servers, you just really do not want to have these advertised out. There's so many things that can go wrong, and so what do you want to do? You want to pull them out of your external DNS records, and then set up strict access control of these. You should have a very limited number of people that should be accessing any of these kinds of servers. That's a very easy audience to target. And I'd even recommend setting up a really good two-factor authentication, so the people are who they say they are when they're getting into it. Make it. Yeah. By the way, I'm a huge fan of two-factor authentication because it's the single best way in Linux servers to prevent remote shells from happening. It's one of the easiest things to implement that'll defeat an awful lot of attacks out there and exploits against Linux. It's amazing to me also how many companies out there have expired digital certificates on their systems, as well as sometimes self-signed certificates. And this is, This is obviously going to cause that the browser for the user to go red. It's not going to look nice, but and they'll have to click through and say, yes, I accept the risk, which a lot of them will do, and that's fine. But if I'm an outside attacker looking in, or a third party looking at you maybe to do business with you, when I start to see things like private IPs advertised out and expired certificates, self-signed certificates, I start to think that maybe your security hygiene, this is indicative of your overall hygiene, that you are probably not as clean internally if you're this dirty in the external face that you're presenting to the world. And that's something to really be kind of aware of, is that by having these kinds of things out there, even if it's on systems that's not going to leak anything critical out to the world, you're sending a message to the world that I'm sloppy with my security. So I actually retitled this one to More Quick Wins, because these are not terribly difficult to fix. But some of the problems I've seen out there, there's a lot of customers that will have insecure SSL services or ciphers. In general, if you've got anything as far as a SSL service that's TLS 1.1 or before, as well as actually SSL v1, 2, and 3, you're going to fail a PCI audit on that particular box if that's a PCI compliant host. And it's also just a bad practice. You should enforce the latest and greatest encryption available. Same thing with ciphers. You should use the tougher ciphers. If you're using something really, really old, like let's say DES, triple DES 128. That's really you want to get up to the more recent hashes that are available. Older web server versions. I can't say how often this happens, and especially when the companies have IP redirects. So someone goes to the www.xyzcorp.thisapplication.com or application.xyzcorp.com. They try to go there, and that server is an old Windows IIS 7.5 server, and it's redirecting you to someplace else. Again, this is the sort of thing that says someone out there is being sloppy with their hygiene. You're allowing an older server to run, even though you're not actively doing anything with it other than redirecting to the new host. By having that there with the older version that's potentially vulnerable, you're sending us a message out there that you're not too good about cleaning up older servers. And what might you want to do when you see that sort of thing is that you might want to put a program in place to make sure that you're migrating these things off fairly quickly. And web servers that ID their version. There's really no good reason to tell an end user what version of code is running on your particular web server. I can't think of a good one. If anyone can, I'm more than game. Tell me a good reason why, especially in the public realm. So,
question for that.
Yeah.
Because you're mandated to expose it to your external scanning vendor.
Boy, I can't.
No, I'm not making it up. I'm telling you. Was mandated by external scanning vendor that was dictated by a very large bank. That Jamie Diamond's the CEO.
Wow. Well, to that end, there's a very good friend of mine used to work for a small casino out in Vegas, and he was told to shut off an awful lot of the security controls, like a two-factor authentication, by their CEO, because that CEO thought that was just too much work to go through to authenticate the servers. And these are servers that do things like control the payouts in slot machines. Nothing could go wrong there. Nothing at all.
Now, the other question on your other slide would be disabling encryption or order encryptions. What do you do if you're a small business and 40% of your revenue comes from an organization that mandates you support IE6?
Wow. Why on earth would you want to support IE6?
Because 40% of my revenue mandates that. So as a smaller vendor, you do what revenue says, why that larger organization took that stance came back. So, again, it's,
Yeah, there's always going to be a balance. I'm just trying to identify where I would see a risk and anywhere where I would want to try and correct that. IE6 is, that's Windows XP, like early versions of Windows XP. That's like circa 2003.
well, I know.
16 years is a long time.
And they're, thankfully, I still have to worry about that. They're also mandating, I don't recall the version, but an older version of Java be installed on the systems.
I have some strong opinions about Java, but I won't share them right now.
Share later.
Yeah, it's very politically incorrect. So on IP redirects, I mentioned before that if you have an IP redirect that goes to an IP, that's going to break app ID. It also will likely break your WAF if you've got a WAF out there. It enables Showdown and other crawlers because they can look you up by IP rather than the proper domain and URL that you want them to use in that application.
Are you talking about web redirect? Like HTTP redirect?
HTTP redirects. Not when. What was the other one? You said when?
Well, I mean, IP redirect is different. I mean, that's a layer 3 thing.
Okay.
Okay.
I was really thinking more on the way we find it out in the tool that we wrote is through either SSL or through HTTP. Those are the ones I was thinking of primarily. We could probably look to see if there's other redirects out there, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet with the information that Showdown contains.
No, I didn't think so. I thought this was something I had never heard of. Okay.
Yeah. End of the day, I just think it's better to have your redirects point to a DNS entry. That makes migrating the servers easier as well. Much easier to do that. Then it was surprising to me also how many customers out there have pivot targets. They're redirecting to a different domain, and that seems to happen fairly regularly. And perhaps your business partner is not all that secure. Best way to handle this is that you just establish a shelf life for your redirects and just say, hey, you know what, server team, we've got 6 months to clean this up. Whatever works inside your organization, just set that time limit. And if it comes down to it, after 6 months, you say, hey, we gave you 6 months to do this. This is a risk. I need to report this up to our internal auditors. And that we've told you about it 6 months ago and you haven't done anything with it. That's the best way I've seen to overcome that kind of objection. And also, inside of the same domain, the same thing applies. It's really another chance to get in some kind of lifecycle management for your server environment. Using a shelf life to time them out, use a DNS pointer record to do so. How many people are using wildcard certificates? A couple. There are some pros to that. It makes it easier to deploy servers. It can help obfuscate your subdomains that you've got hiding underneath that main domain, and then obviously it's cheaper. You're buying fewer certs. There are some disadvantages, and that is that if you do not have your DNS registry locked down, and I would encourage you to check on that if you haven't already. And so you set like client transfer, client delete, and client update all to prohibited or disabled. I would recommend doing that step because if you don't have that step, then anybody can make those changes. It's pretty easy to do. And there's a potential risk to your company, corporate reputation if somebody gets a hold of your credentials and can make these changes. By prohibiting those explicitly with your provider, one of the nice things about that is that according to the RFC, and it's 5714, they have to tell you, they have to reject any request to make any of those changes out of, just by default. And so you get the rejection, And then you can know, well, I didn't make any of these requests, so someone's making these requests, so you know then if someone's trying to knock on the door and try to change some of your domains. So it's just another nice way of getting some heads up that something's happening that you don't want to have happen. Our report pulls back vulnerabilities. Now, I take these with a grain of salt because when you gather vulnerabilities from Shodan, it'll list the kind of vulnerabilities it finds on those systems. All it's really doing is it's saying, we figured out this was an IIS 7.5 server. I pick an IIS a lot. IIS 7.5 has these known vulnerabilities. Now, that server may have been patched for quite a few of those vulnerabilities, but the passive scan doesn't know that. So they may not actually be present. If you want to be really gung-ho, you compare the list of vulnerabilities that it comes back with what you might have from your Nessus or Qualys or Rapid7 scan, whatever you have inside your organization. Now, these are wins that are a little more difficult, ones that require some collaborative effort. Web services can be hardened with App ID, and if you have an App ID capable device in your network, Next-Gen Firewall comes to mind for some reason, I would strongly recommend considering enabling that for all of your web services. There's a number of good reasons to do that because at least in Palo Alto Networks, the way it works is there's a default at the bottom of the most web rules that will allow pretty much any web transaction to go through. But you can start putting in App ID rules with very specific criteria in them to enforce the behavior you want to for how that app is supposed to work using App ID, and you can dramatically reduce the number of entries that hit that default rule at the bottom that you don't want to. The API key leaks usually happen by trusting the client side too much. If you're allowing the client to do too much of the processing in a web transaction, that's where most of the time that's when we see the API leaks come out. The one in particular I was thinking of was really interesting. We saw the API key when it was trying to send logs to a logging server, the Splunk key in that particular case. And so if I had the Splunk key and I know a log server that it's supposed to be going to, that it's paired with, and I know where that one is, if I wanted to attack this organization, I would be sending that log server all sorts of garbage and interesting rabbit holes for them to try and chase down while I'm doing something completely different. And another thing that's actually I forgot to list on here that's kind of fun to do is we actually have. I encourage people to set up rules to handle HTTP codes. And so when you get a 200, or 400, 500 response back, handle those differently. For instance, I can't think of a great reason why you would tell people outside of your organization that there's been a 500 error. Because what are 500 errors? It means there's a server-side error or problem of some sort. So just let it time out if there's a server-side error, rather than telling somebody out on the internet that something that they sent to the server, reached a server that was not able to respond because of some sort of problem. And if you suppress the 500s going out, that's a good start. Another good thing to do is to look at the 400s that come in. Usually those are client-side errors, and so if you have a large number of client-side errors from the same source, then that's something that you could actually use to look up and say, this same person seems to be knocking in a lot of different places. Maybe this is somebody trying to attack us, and a way that you can figure out somebody is trying to knock on your door. And so that's just by handling those using some rules out there. It's not a bad plan. The 500 errors are even better if you have a SOAR or some kind of scripting capability, so you can automatically route tickets at that point to the server team that's responsible for that server. So save yourself some steps. So there's a number of ways to do this. I mentioned there are professional services that do that, BitSight being one of them. You can roll your own if you have some really good scripting skills. Or you can contact your local Palo Alto Networks SE, there's one right there. And you can ask us to come in and we'll do this for you and we'll present the results and show you what they look like. And I should add that it was very interesting. The first time we used this tool on ourselves internally, we found API keys being leaked out. We also found some server pivot targets. There were a number of things that we found that didn't make us look, as good as I really had hoped it would be. It's interesting that most companies come out when we run this tool against them with a fair number of things that we find that are actionable pretty quickly. And it's, I think it's just a reflection of, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace right now. Cloud is difficult, security is difficult, and there's a lot of people that, just don't take a look from the outside in all that often. And that's the whole idea behind this. Make yourself look better from the outside in so that somebody who's likely to attack you might choose someplace else to go. And so, the process when we do this is that we only have a very small team. There's 5 people in the company right now that are allowed to use this tool and have it. So it's a very limited number of folk, but fortunately they're all based in the US, and so they're pretty accessible to anyone here. We can come, run the scan. It only takes about usually 5 minutes to run. It's really, really quick. And then we just have a meeting with you. We show you the results. If you ask us to, we'll destroy them, so that we're not keeping them. We have no interest in holding on to that information. Any questions? I'm sorry?
Does it have a particular name or you just call it?
We call it Assassin, and that was the what the guy who wrote it picked that name, and no one seemed to wants to tell him no one won't call it that. And like I said, it's completely free. We're not charging for this, and a lot of the things that we talk about as far as the results that come out that are actionable are not things that we necessarily sell a product for to fix. A lot of it's stuff that you just fix, through some simple and free things to do internally. And we do that intentionally because we don't want to be ambulance chasers and try and make money off of something that we find. We're just trying to make everyone's security better, and quite frankly, to establish our company's reputation as being a company that cares about security and not just about selling things. So, yes?
Are you releasing it in GitHub?
We are not going to release this in GitHub. And the reason why is that we actually asked internal legal about it, and they're concerned that if someone gets a hold of it and uses it for evil, that we could potentially be liable or on the hook for it. So I'm sorry, we won't give you the code, which is, quite frankly, it's just a big honking Python script. It's not even that big, it's like 600 lines. I would hesitate to do a live demo unless it's for somebody's private organization that you specifically own and have all rights to, because I don't want to do that sort of thing in front of an audience. As far as getting a private demo for your company, wherever you work, engage with your local Palo Alto Networks SE, invite us in and we'll do it for you. You can have the demo then. That's the same reason I don't put up any of the output from this, because the output has domain names over and over and over again in it. Yeah. But the results are pretty much what I've said. Or the things we look for are most of what I talked about. IP redirects, insecure SSL ciphers, things of that nature. And we're happy to talk about it. Eventually, we'll even have an automated script. We'll just say, here's the way you typically fix these. We just haven't written that much into the script. The guy who's doing this is not doing this for his full-time day job. It's a weekend project that's gotten somewhat out of hand. Anything else? Pretty quiet group. Well,
Thank you so much.
okay, well, thanks very much. Do you need to stop anything?